I just left Jones Memorial with Dickie Carlton, my partner at the time, so we were in the area when dispatch sent out the call. Just lucky, I guess. Anyway, dispatch reported a woman with an infant who couldn't stop crying, who didn't have a car to get the kid to the doctor. Said she sounded kind of young, panicking, the whole 9 yards. I give 50-50 odds it was a nothing call. I mean, doctors get them, EMTs do too. First-time mothers who can't get the kid to stop crying, and it turns out to be bad gas or constipation, something like that. They get scared, make the call, and wind up feeling silly about it afterwards. Honestly, I like those calls. The relief on their faces when the kid rips a big burp and finally quiets right down. Anyway, we hit the lights and hustled to the address, a rundown apartment building we'd been familiar with. I grabbed the kit when we got there, and Dickie hit the button for number 304. The name beside the bell was Deal. The door buzzed, and we were inside and trooping up the stairs. We'd been there before. We knew it was a really slow elevator. And not halfway up, I realized the heat in the building was broken, or maybe the super had just turned it off to save money. And the January call to turn the whole place into a big icebox. By the time Dickie pushed open the door on 3, I'd already revised my 50-50 estimate to something a little more serious. It had to be around 40 degrees on those stairs, and cold like that can do bad things to the little ones. Well, the door to 304 opened as we got there, and dispatch had it right. Mrs. Steele couldn't have been more than 22, 23 tops. And she stepped back to let us in the apartment, and I saw right away she was holding the kid, just a swaddled bundle on one arm with the finger ring of a pacifier sticking out of the gap in one end. "Hi," she said as I put the kit down. Her front door opened on the living room side of an open kitchen living room, and she'd put a space heater along one wall that was keeping the room tolerable. Barely. Hi. This is kind of embarrassing, but I think I called you guys out here for nothing. I'd half come to that conclusion already. The pacifier was in place, the kid had obviously stopped crying, and Mom looked a little embarrassed. "Don't worry about it," I said. "It happens. He let out a wail of a burp, or was it the other end?" She didn't do either, as far as I know. She rocked the bundle slightly. She just stopped. I waited for Dickie to say something, but he was being strangely quiet for Dickie. "I didn't panic right away," she said with a little laugh. "The books all say to wait a while, to let them cry, and they'll usually sort the small stuff out." "Port," Dickie whispered. I glanced at him. He was staring at me with a half-frown, obviously sniffing the air. But after she hadn't eaten for a week, I started to get nervous. I reflexively sniffed when I saw Dickie doing it. In summer, we'd have had the odors of the building, maybe 100 laundry hampers, and the family down the hall frying up some of their world-famous garlic and onion goat. With the cold, we only had this apartment to deal with, and even then, the scent was deadened, but I caught it. Almost fruity. Rotten. Bad. And then her words hit me. "Your daughter hasn't eaten in a week?" "3, actually." The young lady bent to nuzzle into the gap above the pacifier. "You were being a stubborn little stinker, weren't you?" Oh, God. "What do you want to do?" Dickie Stage whispered, and his eyes were huge. Dick Carlton could handle any injury the world threw his way, but the crazies freaked him out. I never learned why. I'd seen some pretty fucked up things in Iraq, and knew stress could do funny things to people. There was one kid over there, a landmine had blown off both his legs, and he just sat holding one of them like a teddy bear, telling it about the ball going through Buckner's legs in the '86 World Series while he bled out. I mean, it was the damnedest thing. So anyway, I understood. Sometimes people saying crazy stuff didn't mean they were crazy for real. Dickie, though, didn't. He wouldn't even glance at Mrs. Steele, just stared at me, looking ready to bolt. He was going to be no help here. I put my back to the woman who'd started singing Hush Little Baby to whatever was in that blanket. "You go out where she won't hear and get on the radio," I whispered. "Get some cops, but tell them not to come all lights and sirens. She's not violent or anything, so they're just a precaution, okay?" Got it, Dickie said, and if not for the singing behind me, I might have laughed at the relief on his face. He moved fast, but paused at the door and looked back guiltily. You sure? I mean, he jerked his chin toward the singing woman. You're going to be okay with... I'll be fine, I said, and he was gone before I'd finished the third syllable. I turned, and it was just me and Mrs. Deal. And the baby. She was still bent slightly, gazing into the swaddling with a little smile on her face. And if it had been a painting, the scene could have been hung in a museum under the title Mother with Child. It wasn't a still life, though. She was sort of dancing as she sang, pausing the song and dipping the baby, like a ballroom partner at the end of every line. And if that diamond ring turns brass, dip. Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass, dip. And if that looking glass is broke, dip. I'd seen mothers do that before. Hell, my mother probably did it with me. And for the kid, it's like an amusement park ride. Every dip brings little shrieks and laughter, but not this child. The little mother was swinging her baby with energy and dipping it with vigor, but that little bundle stayed just as silent and motionless as it had been when I'd arrived. I took a breath and instantly regretted it, tasting the funky fruitiness on the air on the back of my tongue and knowing what was giving it that flavor. And if that billy goat won't pull, dip. Ma'am, I said, Mama's gonna buy you a cart and bull, dip. Miss, and if that cart and bull turn over, dip. Miss, may I see the baby? She straightened, just stood frozen, her back to me for the space of a breath. 2. Then her voice came quietly, all the bounce gone out of it, like she was trying to lull the child to sleep. Mama's gonna buy you a dog named Rover. No dipping, no dancing. Mrs. Deal just kept her back to me, stood between me and the small swaddled thing in her arms, crooning quietly. And if that dog named Rover won't bark... Miss, I interrupted a little louder. May I see your baby? A pause. And then, why? It was still in that quiet, lulling voice, but there was no inflection, no hint of a lift at the end of the word like it was a question. If she just put some power behind it, it might have sounded offensive or even argumentative, but the word came out flat and unemotional. And the change from her happy singing, coupled with her absolute stillness, she wasn't shifting her weight, bouncing her baby, or even breathing as far as I could see, was unnerving. And I had a second there where I wished I'd gone out in the hall with Dickie, just hot-footed the fuck out of there and let the cops deal with Deal. But we're here to help people, right? And that's the job. And you do the job. I said, you called an ambulance for your baby, right? If I'm not going to take her for a ride or anything, I need to verify that she's all right. Okay? She stopped crying. She's fine. She was so still, and that voice hadn't changed, and it was really starting to creep me out. I kept talking, hoping to get her back to situation normal, the way she'd been when she'd opened the door. My voice went bouncy and cheerful, like I was unconsciously trying to show her the way back from wherever she'd gone in her head, and I cranked up the bullshit machine. Oh, I know. You know she's fine. I know she's fine, but the folks downtown, look, all they care about is numbers and paperwork. You wouldn't believe the paperwork I have to wade through in this job. But you made an official call, so I have to fill out a call response sheet. And on that sheet, it's going to ask me if I verified that no one at the scene required medical attention. She hadn't spoken or looked at me, but she turned her head slightly, cocking an ear my way. Anything was an improvement over that damned statue stillness. Now, if I fill out that sheet saying that I verified no one needed medical attention, and then it ever gets out that I didn't verify, like see with my own eyes sort of thing, then it could mean my job. And I really need this job. She turned her head farther, was maybe looking at me from the corner of her eye, and I spread my hands. So, if you could let me take a look at her for that stupid form, you understand, I'd really appreciate it. There. It was total bullshit, but most people don't know anything about the job, just what they see on TV. But I turned it into her doing me a favor. We were on the same side, just her and me against a man. So, Mama's gonna buy you a horse and cart. She was still using that soft, singing the baby to sleep voice, and the dip she made was in slow motion and deeper than the others. But it was progress. I was so jittery, though, I jumped when the pacifier fell to the floor with a little thunk. Got it! I darted forward, scooping up the little piece of pink rubber and plastic. I went past her to the kitchen side of the area and rinsed it off in the sink. But when I turned back to her, she'd spun about to face where I'd been, blocking my view and keeping herself between me and her silent little charge. But she was shuffling in a slow sort of dance again, and with that low, slow song. And if that horse and cart fall down, you'll still be the sweetest little baby in town. I edged toward her, holding out that pacifier like an invitation, some proof I was authorized to be there, like I belonged. But I didn't belong, and we both knew it. At some point, her whole world had shrunk to just that frigid little apartment and the tiny little bundle in her arms, and it didn't matter if I was holding a med kit or a binky. I was an intruder, and I'd never be anything else. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Your daddy loves. Her voice trailed off, and her shuffling halted again. I waited a few seconds, thinking it was just a long pause, and she'd finish the song. And I'd ask again to see the kid. But instead of another word, Mrs. Deal made a sound. It was just a small sound, a little moan at the back of her throat. But it was a sound I'd heard once before, and hearing it again shriveled my stomach. I'd met a war widow when I got back from the Gulf, a woman who'd come to meet my plane, convinced that her letter had been a clerical error. The Army makes them all the time, she'd said, transposing a pair of digits in a serial number or confusing two men with the same last name. So there was no way, just no way they'd gotten it right, and it was her Tommy Murphy coming home in a box. Her Tommy Murphy was in a hospital somewhere, or maybe he was just fine and with his unit, but his letters weren't getting through to her for some reason. I'd been in Tommy's unit. She knew, and she knew that I knew where her Tommy Murphy was. She'd even brought a picture to verify we'd be talking about the same Tommy. We were, and so was the Army. The sound she'd made right then, when my words knocked down all the little walls and bulwarks she'd been building inside herself, and all the grief they'd been holding back suddenly rushed through her in an overwhelming flood, that was what came out of Mrs. Deal right then. Your daddy loves. I said very quietly, where's your husband, Mrs. Deal? She straightened. He'll be back in a few days. Her voice had lost any sing-song quality, gone spooky flat again. Most of him. There was an IED and... Anyway, he's coming home. They sent a letter. I'm sorry, ma'am. She stepped away and started pacing, bouncing the bundle as if comforting a finicky baby, though not a sound came from that blanket. It's not even like we're at war, she said, and suddenly she was cheerful again, like she'd been when we'd arrived, though now I could see the strain around her dark eyes and hear the ragged edge of her voice. It was just a police action, sort of a silly little thing in the grand scheme, but there was Dennis getting blown up by a homemade bomb 7,000 miles from home. She shook her head, and her smile said it was almost funny, but her eyes didn't. She made an amused little tss, so like him. Those wounded eyes shot to the table, a closed envelope sitting in the exact center. They sent a letter, she said again, and her tone was anything but flat. She sounded like someone trying to cheer up a pet or a very young child, where a happy tone is much more important than the message itself. When? I asked. Excuse me? When did the letter come, Mrs. Steele? 3 weeks ago, she said. And then she went on, her words picking up speed like a little kid running downhill, going faster and faster because they're already falling and just trying to catch up. But there are delays, always delays with the Army, always hurry up and wait, and he won't be home for another week. But that's fine, it's just fine, just another week, and it'll be fine for me. And so, I interrupted, because unless it's a really short hill, those running kids usually fall hard. And this little mother looked like she had a hell of a lot of hill in front of her. The letter arrived right about the time your baby stopped feeding. She whirled toward me, bundle held tight to her chest and mouth dropped open in almost comic surprise, but her eyes burned fever bright. You know, she said, that never occurred to me before. Of course, how could I have missed something that obvious? Especially with all her crying. For 3 weeks, it's been nothing but crying, and there wasn't anything I could do to stop it. Someone had been crying in this apartment for 3 weeks, but I very much doubted that it had been whatever was left in that blanket. So the letter, I said, it made her sad. Very sad, she said. And she cried and cried, and wouldn't eat. Not a drop. But she was still crying, and all the books say to just let them cry a while, and they'll sort the small stuff out themselves. My throat had gone dry, and while I was trying to maintain that bouncy, cheerful you and me against a man tone of voice, what came out was far too raspy to qualify. Well, then, I'll make sure to include all that in my report. Extenuating circumstances, first-time mother, all that. That's terrific. But still, for that form, may I take a look at your baby, please? She never even blinked at my tone. Of course, she said. And game show hosts wished they could sound as cheerful. Of course, I'm sorry I called you out here for nothing, but really, I wouldn't want you to get into trouble over this. She stepped toward me, holding out the blanket-wrapped little shape. And while her whole face was stretched in a wide, almost desperate grin, the eyes in that face were the eyes of every soldier I'd lied to on my tour through the Gulf. Men to whom I was trying to offer comfort, telling them they were going to make it home. But they knew the truth anyway. Her face was offering the lie, but her eyes knew. I looked straight into those eyes as I accepted the little bundle. So light, I remember thinking, straw! All this time, it's just a straw doll. And said, thank you, though I don't think there was actually any sound. I stared into those eyes as I stepped back a pace, and her hands hung in the air between us, thin fingers twitching and grasping as if, without the baby to hold, they just didn't know what to do. Thank you, I whispered again. And I looked down. The eyes staring up at me were huge and dark and round and far too large for the wizened little face around them. Cheeks that should have been chubby were sunken, and tiny lips that should have been shaping either laughter or cries were stretched back so tightly her white little gums showed. And the skin was so thin and fine, the sockets in the skull around those eyes were clearly visible. I couldn't tell if all this was from malnourishment or if some of it had happened when the little body had started to desiccate, the cold in the apartment slowing decomposition enough that the little figure had time to start drying out like a steak left uncovered in the fridge. What I could tell, however, was this little girl was very, very dead. See, said Mrs. Deal, a game show host revealing a big prize. She's just fine. In my peripheral vision, her hands reached toward me, trembling fingers already seeking the comfort of the pink blanket. She's fine. The happy host was still in there, but it had started sounding a little less happy, a little uncertain. Now, give her back. Still staring down into those huge little eyes, I retreated a step. I tried to say something, tried to say anything, but the words wouldn't come. Give her back, she said, alarm swelling in her voice. I shook my head and retreated another step, my rump bumping lightly against the sink edge. Hey! Panic was boosting her voice. Higher, louder. She's fine! Give her back! Now! Behind her, the apartment door opened and two uniformed cops walked in fast, slowing when she spun to face them, spreading their hands a bit and trying to look non-threatening. "Mrs. Deal," said the older one, "we're going to need you to remain calm, okay?" "What are you talking about?" The game show voice was gone now, and she was all panic all the time. "I called an ambulance, not the police. My baby's fine." The cop who was doing the talking looked at me, raising his eyebrows in a silent, desperate question, and I shook my head. His eyes closed for a moment, and he took a long, slow breath. "Mrs. Deal, we're going to take care of your baby." Behind him, his partner motioned me toward the door. I followed his suggestion as Mrs. Deal shouted, "My baby's fine!" moving quietly around the outside of the room rather than walking right past her, staying out of reach. I think she might have started for me when I came into view, but I couldn't look at her. All I know is the cop slid between us, blocking her path as soon as I was past her. "Where is he going with my baby?" she shrieked. But the cop just repeated, as flat and implacable as smooth water, "We need you to remain calm, Mrs. Deal." Dickie was waiting in the hall. "I heard almost the whole thing," he said. "I figured you had it under control pretty good, so I didn't come in. I briefed the cops, though, so—" A wail split the air, a terrible sound, full of more pain and anguish than can be expressed with mere words. I'd last heard it in an airport when I'd shattered a young wife's hope. "Jesus Christ," said Dickie Carlton, but I kept walking, kept carrying that little bundle away from the woman making that terrible sound. I made it halfway to the stairs before I threw up. Karen Deal was the baby I carried out of that apartment. I didn't find out her name until I got her to the coroner. They'd done a record search before I even got there. Dr. Black was on that night, and he immediately gave her the once-over, verifying my death pronouncement. He was the one filling out the death certificate, after all, and I was way past caring by that point. And this is what makes this Karen's story, the part that made me go running back out of there faster than Dickie Carlton had fled that apartment, the part that still keeps me up at night, even though that was close to a dozen years ago now. "Well, that's odd," said Doc Black. "What?" "Her eyes," he said, and my stomach gave a twinge. "The cornea should have hazed just hours after death when her system stopped pumping moisture through them, but these look perfectly normal." "I noticed that," I said, stepping a little closer. "Is she not dead? Some kind of coma, maybe?" He sighed. "No, she's gone. The cold will make it harder to pinpoint exactly when, and starvation was underway, but this little girl died of dehydration. With a hungry, crying infant, the process would have been accelerated by the crying itself. And maybe the mother didn't feed her for 21 days, but really would have only taken 1, 2, tops. But the way she died should have accelerated the hazing, not... What the hell?" "What?" He fumbled with something. "I've never seen..." I stepped up beside him. "What?" I said. "What is it?" For an answer, he dropped the sterile gauze pad he was holding and scooped up another. He blotted and pointed, and I looked. As I watched, moisture collected in the corner of one eye, and then the other. It collected, then overflowed, trickling down her cheeks. Dr. Black patted them dry, and it happened again, and then again. I have no idea how long it went on because I turned and ran. I ran, but I can never get away from the memory of little Karen Deal, almost 3 weeks dead, tears silently falling from her perfect brown eyes.